Hello everyone, I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. As a child growing up along the North Carolina coast, Christina Koch used to look up to the stars from her backyard in Jacksonville and dream about exploring the heavens. The difference between Christina and many other kids who might have had that dream is that she never grew out of it. Decades after having the dream, she achieved it, spending 328 days on board the International Space Station, setting the record for the longest single space flight by a woman. On the ISS, she conducted experiments, she installed new equipment, and she went on several spacewalks, including the first ever all-female spacewalk by NASA astronauts. She also learned how to play a musical instrument. She took several selfies and a lot of pictures while she was on board. And Christina Koch also became the first astronaut to ever be slimed in space. And Christina Koch, who holds the record for the longest space flight by a woman, 328 days. Welcome, Christina, to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast.
Thank you, John. It's great to be with you.
How are you being impacted by the coronavirus pandemic? I know you were somewhat isolated up there on the ISS for 11 months, but where are you right now?
Well, I'm at home just like most people. I think that it's actually affected me similarly to everyone else, not only in our country, but around the world. Making sure to stay at home and to do, our job to keep our communities healthy. So for me, I think the difference is that some of the feelings that we're all experiencing coming into the second month of those stay at home, they're familiar to me. So as people bring up things that they're going through to me, I think, yep, I know what you mean.
I understand. When you were in Hunters Creek Middle School or White Oak High School in Jacksonville, North Carolina, what were your dreams back then? What did you want to do? Was space involved?
You know what? It was. In fact, when people ask me how long I've wanted to be an astronaut, it's actually difficult to even answer because I don't really remember a time when there was anything else I wanted to be. Growing up in North Carolina, I like to say I used to love things that made me feel small and made me ponder the size of the universe. I used to look up at the stars from my backyard in Jacksonville, North Carolina, through the trees. And that was kind of what captivated me. Being from coastal North Carolina, I love the ocean. So, Hunters Creek and White Oak, I was telling my teachers even back then that I wanted to be an astronaut. I was in the Rocket Club in 7th grade at Hunters Creek. And, I only received encouragement from all of my teachers, even being from a small town. And so I just really credit them for never telling me I was crazy and always making sure that I knew that I could dream big.
White Oak High School, I know it well, covering high school football games when I worked at New Bern at Channel 12 there, and then taking my daughters to band competitions at White Oak High School.
Yeah.
That's a pretty strong high school academically and for the arts.
It really is. When I think back to a lot of the things that I love, I was first introduced to them at White Oak. I got to be in athletics myself. I was a cheerleader. I loved going to the musicals that my high school produced, the art classes that we had. And, just thinking back to even the extracurricular classes that I took, I was able to do advanced math classes and science there. So I really credit a lot back to White Oak High School.
How did you get there? I know you were born in the state of Michigan, right? How did your family get to Jacksonville?
Well, my family moved to Jacksonville. My dad's a physician, and he went to medical school in Michigan and then decided to open up a small family practice in Jacksonville, North Carolina. I think he met a medical school partner who was going to come to practice in North Carolina, and that's how we ended up there, and we made it our home. And my family, we were all raised there, 4 kids, all went to, through White Oak and other schools there, and we actually all also went to North Carolina State University. So
you're all Wolfpackers.
That's right.
Do you remember, Christina, when you may have had that first desire that I want to go up there? I want to be in space. Do you remember when it may have first hit you, where you were, what brought it on?
I think it really was probably brought on the same way for any young child. You look at the night sky, you hear about these exciting careers known as astronaut careers. And for me, the difference was I just didn't grow out of it. And I think so more of the question is, when did it solidify? And I think back to family trips to Kennedy Space Center, where I was just completely wowed, Growing up in North Carolina, I had a lot of people around me that inspired me, but I didn't necessarily see a lot of people in technical fields like engineering and sciences. So seeing that kind of thing in action by visiting Kennedy Space Center and the awesome places that you could go with that was what really brought it close to home and made me realize that it was actually a possibility, something I could go after. And I came home from that trip with posters that I had bought in the gift shops. I put them up on my walls as a middle schooler, and those were eventually what drove my passions right on into adulthood.
Now, you were better than 11 months on the International Space Station, but it really wasn't the first time that you had worked in kind of an isolated setting. I looked up some of your history. You spent a year in the South Pole with the U.S. Antarctic program. You were at Palmer Station in Antarctica, at the Summit Station in Greenland, at the NOAA Global Monitoring Division Baseline Observatory in Barrow, Alaska. So you are kind of used to faraway places where you're doing your work, straight up right here in front of you.
Yep, that's right. I did learn a lot from my experiences in those places. And really what drove me to those jobs and positions were the same thing that drove my passion for the space program. I mentioned the posters up on my walls as a middle schooler. I also had posters of Antarctica. I used to cut them out of magazines that we got at home. And I think that science and discovery on the frontiers is really kind of the theme that runs through it all. So I had a job actually at NASA out of college, and I ended up leaving that position to chase after one of my dreams, to work in one of those remote field sites at the South Pole. And, that was really just the start of kind of following a lot of passions that involved both remote work, being adaptable, and being able to apply my love for science and engineering at the same time.
Do you remember one of those first times in one of those remote locations, North Pole, South Pole, just kind of looking out and going, wow? Because you can look at pictures, you can look at books, but until you get there, I can only imagine what it's like.
That's so right and so insightful. I will never forget the first moment I stepped off of the military aircraft that brought us all down to the South Pole. And I basically just did a 360 looking around in all directions. I couldn't believe I had actually landed somewhere so remote, so foreign to everything I had ever known, and that I was actually there. And then I realized that I couldn't feel my hands, and it was very cold.
That's funny. That's a good deal. You're out there, you're doing what you want to do, and then, well, I guess there was probably a second of indecision at that point in time. Did I choose the right path?
Oh, there were lots of moments where I wondered if it was the right thing to do. I jokingly say that one of the first times I ever shoveled snow was at the South Pole at the beginning of the year that I committed to live there. So it's interesting when someone from sunny, warm North Carolina decides to live somewhere so cold and foreign.
Yeah, snow here is a 3-day lead story for us when we get it in southeastern North Carolina. You know that really well.
I sure do.
Do you remember where you were when you found out that you had made NASA's astronaut class in June of 2013, when you got the call, when you got the email? Take me back to that time.
None of us will ever forget where we were when we got that call. And for me, it was a really unique situation. So those jobs that we talked about, Science on the Frontiers, had brought me to a remote island in the South Pacific called American Samoa. And I was working in that location for a NOAA baseline observatory. And due to the time change, the phone call that I got from the lead of the interview committee came at 6 a.m. and I was still asleep. So I got this call and I was completely rendered speechless when the voice on the other end said to me, "We want you to come join our team in Houston." And I really couldn't speak. I was processing what had really happened. And because I think it was so early in the morning and I was just waking up, the person had to prompt me and say hello again a couple times to make sure I was still there. But the truth is I was so sure that it was going to be a call with the bad news that, there were a lot of people, sorry, not everyone could make it. And it just took me a long time to change around my thinking to recognize that the call was actually with good news. And I had taken a couple notes scribbled down on a Post-it note next to my bed, and I came home from work that day, and just to make sure it had really happened, I ran and looked at that Post-it notepad again, and sure enough, it had happened. We were told to keep the news quiet because there was going to be an announcement coming up later, so I hadn't really been able to share the news with anyone, and it seemed very surreal at the time.
In the whole training that you had to go through, because if I'm correct, you had to learn to fly. You had to learn a lot of different things that eventually took you to the ISS. But was there any part of that that almost drove you too much, that made you almost say, okay, see ya, next person up?
You know what? Absolutely. The two things that I would say were the most challenging for me were learning to fly, because that's something that I had no experience with, and it was completely different from the things I had gained skills at and experience with in my career. And then also learning the Russian language. I am not skilled at learning languages, and that was really tough. But they say, you know, only the first 10 years are the hard years. So I'm still working on that. I actually have Russian lessons even today, even after having flown on the ISS for 11 months with cosmonauts. So, you know, I think that in all of our training, it seems like a mountain when you first start. And what you learn to do is just to trust in the process, that you will get there, to remember that you just take little chunks at a time. And for me, I'm a preparer. So one of the ways I get through it is I study. It doesn't necessarily always come naturally, but I make a point to really work at it and to kind of remind myself that you can't climb the mountain unless you take a step. So step by step.
I've watched a lot of videos that you've done as I was preparing for this, because I was hoping to do it when you first got back and your schedule was just so jammed. But I had watched a lot, and the thing that I found and took away was, you said on the day you took off on that Soyuz rocket, you had trained for it, and it was almost like another training mission until the rocket actually got up in the air. Can you in any way describe that kind of a feeling? Because those of us who will never feel that just see all the shaking, and you feel like it's almost got to be like an earthquake. But inside there, what's that like? Is it something like you've never felt before?
Definitely something like I've never felt before. If I could liken it to anything, it's the bumpiness sensation of a roller coaster, but the difference is that you know that you're going up, and you're going straight up. You can feel the G-forces on your chest, and like I've said before, you realize that after going up and up for so long, and you can tell you're going so fast, the only place you could be is space. And sure enough, that's exactly where you end up after 8 minutes of the rocket just launching you straight up into the air. It's a really phenomenal feeling. It's one that you can't, truly describe, and you can't know, even though as astronauts, we're always telling each other what to expect and all that. Until the countdown actually reached 0 and we started actually moving, you can, hear the rumbling of the rocket. You don't really know truly what that feeling is, but being definitely filled with a sense of just satisfaction that it was actually happening, and that so much of my career was coming into culmination in this moment, and just taking all those pieces that had happened for so many years and putting them together and ending up at the end, the third stage of that rocket stops and you float a little bit out of your seat and you know that you're in space.
Are you a person of faith? As that was going down 5-4, did you say, okay, Lord, it's in your hands? What, give me that picture.
I feel like there's no one that's not a person of faith when you hear the countdown going 3, 2, 1. So absolutely. I think that, what we do is a risky business. It's a business where we mitigate risk with all the technological and training and operational skills and tools that we have. But at some point you do turn it over. And I think one thing that I told my husband was that if the worst ever did happen, it would be happening in pursuit of something that I truly believed in and in pursuit of my dreams.
Yeah, and again, the reason I ask is, many of us who have been around to see the space shuttle and all those things can only know what it must be like in there. You had worked so hard several years, but at some point in time, as you just said, you've got to say, okay, Lord, if this is meant to be, here we go, kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. That one of the sayings that we have on launch day is that the astronauts are actually the calmest people in the room. And it's true. I think on the day of the launch, we're sort of filled with just a sense of serenity that at this point, it's definitely happening. Like I said, everything we've worked towards is culminating in this moment. We know we're prepared, and we know we're about to strap into that seat and do the job before us.
11 months, 328 days. I could talk to you for 4.5, 5 hours about it. But one of the things I saw that you said is that seeing coastal North Carolina was one of your favorite scenes when you were up there. Did it bring a tear? Did it choke you up a little bit, or how did that play in your mind?
It did at the time, and it continues to when I talk about it. I'll never ever forget the moment because, looking at the horizon of the Earth and as things come into focus in the direction that we're flying over, things are so far away when they originally come over the horizon, you can't make them out. You're viewing them from askew. And as they slowly become closer to, being directly below you, you start to be able to make them out, and especially to be able to recognize, features that stand out. And there was a moment when I was just looking at some coastline. I was trying to determine, where the land started, where the clouds were, where the ocean was. And then in an instant, I just saw it clear as day, the Outer Banks. And I will never forget that moment. I was with Nick Hague in the cupola, which is the window that looks down upon the Earth. And I just exclaimed, I just couldn't believe what I was looking at. And I said, there it is. And I started taking pictures. So it was a really special moment. Every single time we flew over the Outer Banks, it was special for me. I always tried to be in the cupola at that moment if I could.
You learned to play the keyboard on board the ISS. Couldn't you have done that here? Did you have to go to outer space to learn to play the keyboards?
Learning to play the keyboard may be a little bit of an overstatement for what I did. I learned one song fairly poorly. And yes, so to fill in the rest of that story as a sort of doing something special for my husband on our anniversary, I learned to play a song that he had put on a playlist for me in orbit that I really, really loved, and that made me think of him. And so it was a surprise, and he was very kind to listen to the whole song, even though I made a lot of mistakes while playing it. But it was a special moment, and it was a fun way to kind of, do something new. I think even in this time of stay at home and isolation, bringing new talents or hobbies into our lives is a good way to kind of cope with the sensory underload that we might all be experiencing.
What was it like running in space? I saw some of the video. It looked like you were actually strapped down.
Yes.
But do you have to almost learn to do that? I mean, this is something everybody down here does and doesn't even really think twice. But if you want to stay in shape up there and try to run whatever it is, a mile, 2 miles, whatever, do you have to strap in? And how did that all work?
We do have to strap in. So definitely exercise is something we're kind of mandated to do about every 2 hours a day. We do both cardio and what you would call weightlifting or resistance training. And running in particular, I'm a runner on the ground, so I really enjoyed the running up there, but it definitely took a little time to get used to because without gravity to keep you down and keep you walking, it doesn't work. So you have to wear a harness that applies weight to your shoulders and to your hips and straps you down with bungees on the side to the base of the treadmill. And so obviously the weight isn't carried exactly like it is with just gravity normally on your body. It does take a little bit of time to get used to, but eventually it's really a great substitute for regular running. And even more eventually, once I got into the later months of my mission, I couldn't even picture walking. I would try and imagine myself with pressure on my feet walking around just on my own on Earth, and it was really hard to even envision.
One of the pictures I saw of you is the camera's this way, and in your visor, you can see the Earth. And I just thought that was such a neat, I don't know if it was a selfie or if that somebody caught it, but it was one of those. I also saw your favorite picture of the rocket launch, and it looks like a star. You said that was your favorite picture, but the one I thought that was really cool was you were actually outside, and the Earth actually cast a glow on your mask. I just thought, or shield, I guess it was. I just thought that was just an incredible thing to be able to take away. You're seeing Earth and you're working, but just in this cosmos we live in, you're just a small part of it, but you're just about a lot higher than the rest of us are.
Yes, that's exactly right. And we really are all in the same universe. And the perspective that you get when you're out there working in the blackness of space and the vacuum of space on a spacewalk is like no other. You're actually immersed in that, in that universe and in that environment that normally from the space station, you're only seeing out the window. So it's really an amazing perspective change to be in it, to be, crawling around, using your hands to get around the outside of the space station. But I really like those pictures too. I think they really tell the story of both sides, because not only do you see the person in the environment, but you see it through their eyes as well.
But what I thought I saw was I just saw the joy in your eyes. You know, and that's something that I think the picture tells better than you can tell, even putting words to it.
Yep, I agree. There's some things that you just can't express, but to see it happening and to see me taking it in at the same time, thank you.
The walk with Jessica, and this is probably a pretty bad pun, but did you feel the gravity, ha ha ha, of the importance of that when you were on that first all-female spacewalk?
We did. I think that taking it all in was something we really didn't do until it was over and we had a chance to kind of exhale. Interestingly, that spacewalk had so many different elements to it that made it special. And one of those was that it was a contingency spacewalk. It was not planned. We went out the door, went out the hatch with a plan that had only been tried one time in our training facility on the ground and that had been actually been designed in 1 week's time. So leading up to it, we were really just buckling down, studying the technical details, practicing the choreography, getting our tools ready, getting our suits ready. Afterwards, and I think a few moments during the spacewalk itself, we had a chance to just kind of pause and take it all in. I'll never forget the moment when we first both came out of the hatch. We caught each other's eyes, and we knew at that point that we were out on a spacewalk together, and it had happened. So that was a really special moment. And then, of course, coming back, just being completely overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, you know, just so grateful for those that paved the way for us to be there at that time. So privileged to be able to potentially be inspiring so many people, and just honored to be able to contribute to something that we had both held in such high regard our whole lives. It was just a truly, truly special moment.
You were the first person to be slimed in space.
You know, that's a record not many people talk about.
But the thing of it is, I mean, you had a lot of fun with the slime, with Nickelodeon and working with them. I thought that was really fun. But what I also thought, what a great way to get the next generation interested in outer space and the space program.
I completely agree. I think that one of NASA's missions that is so important is that element of inspiration. You know, getting people interested in the STEM fields is so important for them reaching their potential, but also for our country and remaining preeminent. And, you know, innovation is so important right now. So it's such an important part of our mission. And that particular experiment was just so exciting because it really highlighted the aspect of science that's really based on discovery and curiosity and going into a situation with an open mind and thinking about how we can answer some questions that we have about the universe with science. So it was a really fun one to be involved in on a lot of levels.
But you know, maybe in 25 or 30 years, some young lady will say, I watched her with slime on the International Space Station, and that was the moment I wanted to do it.
You know what? If slime can inspire, I am happy to be a part of it.
Do you desire to be the first woman to walk on the moon or Mars? Where is your want to go list now that you've been on the ISS and set the record?
Well, I'm not really one for bucket lists. I really just try and focus on contributing in the best way possible. So I hope that whoever's selected for that mission is just going to be the perfect person for those missions. Of course, exploration has always been something that I've held in really high regard. If I were ever to be able to be a part of those, it would be a huge honor. But for right now, I'm just excited that I'm going to know the first person, the first woman to walk on the moon, and the next people to walk on the moon, and hopefully even the people to go on to Mars afterwards.
You told People magazine, do what scares you. And if it's just outside what you think is attainable for you and you reach it, it really pays off in dividends more ways than one. Were you scared at all?
You know, we are taught to take any kind of a fear or being scared and turn it into focus. So I remember very few times where I could quantify what I was doing as being scared. But where I was more scared was before I ever hit submit on my astronaut application. I was scared maybe I wouldn't make it. I was scared of being denied, which I was pretty much sure was going to happen. The stakes are so high and the odds are so low. So reaching for it, I think, is the part that's scary. And then, you know, being on board the space station, we are in such good hands, both technically from the people running the systems to our trainers, that we have so much training to rely on that fear really doesn't play into it except when you can channel it into focus. So I just feel really lucky to be a part of a program that has that level of support behind us.
Well, from yourself to Curtis Brown, the Bladen County native who flew 6 missions on board the space shuttle, Southeastern North Carolina really has a strong history in this country's space program.
Yes, I agree. And you know what? I say all the time, some of the things that I picked up from my childhood in Jacksonville, appreciation for diversity, a lot of different opinions, a lot of different people from all over the world, and even just the caring spirit of, being from the South and somewhere that really, the whole idea is to care about your neighbor, to be kind, and to sort of present that first and foremost before anything. Those are really the things that I think are some of the most important takeaways that I've had from Southern North Carolina, Southeastern, down east, and I'm really proud to say that I am from there.
And plus there's always North Carolina barbecue too. You can't argue with that.
Can't argue with North Carolina barbecue. Sadly, it has not made its way into a dehydrated food packet on board the space station, but if I have my say in future food, I will definitely let them know that that's where they need to go.
You got to have it, and you got to have it both ways, barbecue and vinegar, right?
Absolutely.
All right, Christina, this has really been a pleasure talking to you. I've wanted to do this for a long time. Ever since you were selected, I've been trying to get you on the podcast because I just think it's fascinating for somebody to work so hard and achieve those dreams and then still want to do and want to inspire more. I'm just glad that I found the time and could get time on your schedule to talk today.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for what you do to inspire people from North Carolina and everywhere telling these stories. It's great to be a part of it. Thank you.
I want to thank Christina Koch for taking some time out of her very busy day to be a part of this week's podcast interview. I just think her story is fascinating. And if you would like to learn more about it, you can go to her page on the NASA website. It is nasa.gov. And let me tell you where you can follow her on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, she is astro_Christina. And on Facebook, you can follow her at NASA astronaut Christina Hammock Cook. And now before we go, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please download and subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast on whatever app you use to listen to your favorite shows. And if you would be so kind, please leave us a rating or a review. The more feedback, ratings, and reviews we have from people like you, the higher we'll be listed on the podcast apps, and the better chance we'll have of bringing in even more new listeners. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of One-on-One. Stay safe.